this was the person that I felt most comfortable with in the world, or that this is the person who I felt most seen by. And so when we reconnected, it was like when you've been underwater for a long time, you dive off a cliff, you're deep in the water and suddenly you're swimming and you get up and you're like, just taking a deep breath of air. It just felt like this, like, oh my gosh, there it is. This is the thing that I need. It's vital. Like, this is the relationship. Like, I need this. Like, I need oxygen. Like, I feel this in my bones. Like, this is the person that I am happiest with.
The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled, to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. The people I've met through this project give me energy and hope for a better future. May their inspirational words and practical advice embolden and guide you on your own journey. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. Urban Exodus is a labor of love and is only made possible by listener support. To support our programming, please consider making a listener contribution or joining our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews, videos, and so much more. I was so excited to reconnect with Franchesca Hernandez for this episode of the podcast. I met Francesca on my Urban Exodus cross-country road trip in the spring of 2015. And back then, she was living in a yurt on her Whirlaway Farm in Garfield, Texas. When she first bought her property, it was a little more than a scrubby 3-acre lot covered in weeds. But through sweat and hard work, she transformed it into an abundant farm and homestead. She was recently engaged to be married and felt rooted to this forever home in rural Texas. But since we last connected, Francesca's life has taken a wholly new, unexpected, and joyful turn. Francesca and her fiancé broke up, and it left her running the farm business on her own. One fateful day, she reconnected with an old flame from her teenage years, and they fell madly in love. And after an unexpected pregnancy at 40, she and her partner, who's British, rushed to move to France before Brexit took hold and made European citizenship out of reach. So they moved to the French countryside. This is a story about reuniting with lost love, breaking generational patterns, moving past fear, and the joy of unexpected new beginnings. So I am really excited to have on the podcast today Franchesca Hernandez, singer. And Francesca, this is the first time I'm seeing your lovely face in virtual life. I met you back, I think, in 2015 when we were traveling across the country photographing for this project. The moment I met you, you are just such an amazing human being, and you are a writer, and the way that you speak is poetry. And I was just really excited to reconnect with you again and to talk about this latest journey that you've embarked on, because I think that probably a lot of listeners listening, you have these dreams of moving to the country, but I think like the real dream in a lot of people's minds is like picking up and moving to the French countryside. So I wanted to talk to you about that and also talk about the realities of it, because I think we just over romanticize everything when it comes to lives that we can't grasp what they're like. So just really excited to have you here. So first, I'd love if you just share a little bit of your backstory, where you grew up, your childhood, and how that's really informed the person you are today and the life that you're leading now.
All right. Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm so happy to see you again, because I think that we were both kind of at the beginning of our journeys back then. So I grew up in Texas, and mostly Austin, Texas, but also some of my childhood was spent in New Mexico. And I had a really weird childhood. We moved around, it was unstable. But my happiest childhood memories were from the times that we lived kind of rural. Like when we lived in Santa Fe, we lived in the mountains outside of town. And as a very small child, we lived on Lake Travis outside of Austin before it was developed. And so I think I always had a fantasy about living in the country and having a farm. There are no like farmers in my immediate family. I just had this dream. I have a really deep connection with nature, and I always have wanted to be closer to it somehow. So I feel like the trajectory of my life has been sort of pushing in that direction steadily for a while.
You know, when we first met, you had just finished building out this raw piece of land outside of Austin in Garfield, Texas. And I wondered what that initial journey was like into farming and, you know, what that breaking point was that made you just decide, this is it, I have to do this, I'm going.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I had a really crazy other dream trajectory for my life, which was, I'm going to make it as short as possible. Like, I have a degree in landscape architecture, which I got into because I was studying like international development, specifically like rural development. And so I had this big picture dream. Like, I don't have any visible tattoos because from the time that I was a teenager, I thought that I was going to end up working for the United Nations in development. And I wanted to look super professional. I didn't want to be like judged. And so I know it's crazy. So like after I got my degree in landscape architecture, I was looking at grad school. I thought I was going to go and get a degree in like agronomy or whatever. I was poising myself. I was going to do Peace Corps. I was positioning myself so that I would be a great candidate for like international development positions with the United Nations. And I had a friend who had just finished working with one of the big names in like integrative farming, Joel Salatin. My friend had just worked with Joel Salatin. He'd done like a year-long like fellowship with him. He was in town in Texas and we went out to lunch and I was telling him my dream, which was I'm going to work for the UN. I'm going to, you know, they notoriously pay very well. I was like, I'm going to do this for like a decade or so. I'm going to amass all this money. Then I'm going to buy some land somewhere and I'm going to have a farm and like a nonprofit. And he gave me this crazy look and he was like, wow, that's a lot of to go through to have a farm. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's kind of true.
Before I moved, I also had this like dream board of leaving my corporate job and buying a blueberry farm someday and living my dream. And it was like those steps. It's like we put these things in place. And is that like this narrative of the American dream? Like, what is it that we put these roadblocks in front of our dreams?
Like we're gatekeeping ourselves.
Yeah.
Like you'll deserve it if you do all these other things. It's like, wait, what? So yeah, so then I performed very poorly. Like my GRE, I did great, except for the comp, the mathematical part, kind of bombed, like really did badly. And so I was like, I don't really have scores to get the fellowship I want. I can retake the test, or I could cut and run and just start looking at land and really start thinking about just having a farm, which is exactly what I did.
You found this little piece of land, you put a yurt up, you built this farm. What ultimately led you from there to move to the French countryside? Because I think when we had met, you were about to get married or your partner was about to move.
That's right. Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. So I was in a long-term partnership that dissolved in 2016. 2016 was a hard year for a lot of us for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, I suddenly saw the things that I had wanted, like marriage and maybe having a family, and all these things kind of disappeared. And I was like, wow, I'm almost 40. I don't know if I'm going to have these things. I had a very hard year of just sort of, slogging through the farm, being very depressed, trying to figure out like, how do I get my groove back? Like, where am I going with my life? And I I'm not somebody who like gets depressed and can't get out of bed in the morning. I'm just like, I get depressed and I just throw myself wholeheartedly into things. So I bought a really cute little 1950s bungalow, had it moved onto the farm, started embarking on like a renovation project, and just, started really thinking about what did my future look like. I was very unhappy politically with America, and I was looking at getting dual citizenship because my dad is a Mexican citizen. So I thought, oh, well, I could move to Mexico. I started weighing options, like where could I go if I wanted to leave? But I was still committed to staying. And then my husband, we've been in touch for many years. We were together like 20 years ago. And he was like the great love of my life. He was in town. He was living in London for like 25 years. He was in town in Austin visiting his dad. And I invited him to drive out to West Texas with me for New Year's. I just wanted to go camping and just like explore a part of Texas I hadn't seen. He agreed. And so we went on this adventure together, and we just sort of romantically reconnected, which was very unexpected because we'd been really comfortably platonic friends for a very long time. Shortly thereafter, like the next summer, I got pregnant, and we were both like, he's in people in our 40s. So it's not like we didn't know how you get pregnant, right? It should not have been a surprise. We weren't careless, but it happened. And we were both like, well, we're not having a baby in Texas. Like that just, for him as a British person, he was like, absolutely not. Brexit was in the process of happening. He was really freaked out about the possibility of losing his status as a European citizen because he'd been a European his whole life. And so we started thinking about, before I got pregnant, we were already thinking about like, what if I woofed? Like I was planning on woofing, working, like just spending 3 months at a time in Europe, 3 months on, 3 months off. I was going to go to France, work some farms, and just kind of get a feel for the country. Because we decided France was like, he knew a little bit of French. I just thought it sounded like a nice country that I hadn't spent much time in. I was like, oh, I like the French farming tradition. So we had this whole plan when I got pregnant, and suddenly it was like, oh no, okay, we should probably just move before this baby is born so that we can establish ourselves. And so that's essentially what happened. We just like made a very rapid plan and did it. I mean, yeah, it's a lot.
Okay. So that's wild. And also, how did you plan for that move? Because I think that there are a lot of people that would love to live or relocate to another country, and just the like paperwork or like visas and all of that is so scary that they would never do it just because of those barriers. So I wondered what that was like for you, and any words of advice you might have for people who want to follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, of course. I mean, first of all, I have a very unfair advantage that I will openly admit, which is that this is why we got married. I'm married to a European, not anymore. I was married to a European. We're still married. He's just not European anymore. So
he's British now. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So we did not have the luxury of time on our side, like because Brexit was encroaching. Once Brexit happened, he knew he would lose his EU citizenship. So we had to install ourselves and establish residency before he lost citizenship in the EU. We had to get here before I had a baby. So like we had time constraints that, I don't think most people would do what we did. And I don't recommend it because it was insane. Anybody who wants to do such a thing, I highly recommend looking at the requirements for residency. There are like, every European country has different requirements. Some are really easy. Like Holland I tell everybody this, Holland is amazing. If you can start a business, even if it's like dipping candles in your living room, like if you can create any kind of business, you need like $5,000 And the Dutch government welcomes you with open arms and will give you citizenship in like 3 years. It's called the Dutch Friendship Treaty.
What?
It's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. Just put that in your, yeah. Anybody, American that wants to start a business in Holland has like the full support of the Dutch government and can do it.
Francesca, I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I think that I've heard. It just, not even if you want to leave the US, but just it's nice to know that there are those pathways, that they still exist.
Nobody knows about it.
Also, they ride bicycles everywhere there.
Also, they speak English. Every Dutch person speaks perfect English. So it's like, everybody needs to know, if you just really are just itching to move to Europe and you don't have the inclination to learn another language, Holland is fantastic. And it's an option and it is very available. So
that's amazing advice. I'd love for you to describe, so you moved to France. Where are you living now in France? I'd love for you to kind of describe your home and the community where you live now.
All right. So when we first landed, we were like on the other side of the country and very, very, very rural, but in like the mountains. Now we're in the southwestern side of the country, very close to Spain. And it's just hills, extremely agrarian. We're in the Gers, which is like, France is broken up into departments. They're sort of like counties or states. And so the Gers is in the Midi-Pyrénées. We can see the Pyrenees Mountains from outside. It's the most rural of all the departments. There's like not a single interstate freeway here. Where we live is wild. I'm looking out the window, like our closest neighbors are like a half mile away. It's beautiful. It's very isolated. We have a lot of we're surrounded by agriculture, which really suits me. I really like it. We got lucky. We didn't know when we bought, but we bought this house that's really close to a super cool community. There are a lot of kind of hippie, just very alternative type people, lots of artists. It's a really rich vein of culture that we tapped into, and we just feel really fortunate about it. Although, to be fair, small town France is not like small town America. Like small towns across the country are very rich with culture. You will have live chamber music. It's just a different type of culture.
I've certainly been to rural communities in the US that have some of those elements, but just from traveling in Europe, I would say that's spot on. It's like everybody in the village has multiple hats and multiple roles that they play. And it really does feel like what your ideal bucolic idea of a community looks like.
It's bizarre. And initially it really there were days before we lived in an old medieval village. And if I could hear my neighbor's music, it was like Bach, it was like they'd be playing beautiful classical music. And I just kept thinking, this feels ridiculously cliched, right? This can't be real. We drive down the road and you see all these old men in flat caps, playing pétanque. And I'm like, seriously, this is real life. This is just how, once we were in a city and we saw a guy, moving blocks of ice, wearing a beret. And I'm like, what is this? What is this place? It's very French. The French are very French for real.
What are some of the hard things that you've had to navigate since arriving there? Because it isn't easy to move to a country where you don't really have a good grasp on the language. Even if you have somewhat conversational in a language, if you aren't fully fluent, it's so hard for you to express your personality and connect with people on different levels. So what has that been like for you?
Oh man. That's actually been the hardest part, especially in the beginning, because it took me 1.5 years to get my residency permit. And it was a lot of, administrative work. And the French administration is it's bananas. It's just getting a bank account takes 3 meetings and 500 pages of, it's nothing's easy. Everything's hard. And in the beginning, I would go down to buy bread and I would try to ask the lady, like, oh, what is that pastry or whatever? And I didn't have any language. I literally didn't even know how to say, like, what is that? It was very humbling and still is. I mean, 4 years on, my French is just eons away from where it was, but I'm not fluent and I still struggle. I think one of the greatest challenges is just trying to, and you said it best, honestly, is like, I'm an extroverted person and I love people. My daughter has grown up watching me navigate a world where I don't speak the language that well. So I don't feel like she gets to know me as like an extroverted and chatty person who like easily picks up with strangers, because I have these kind of weird, strained interactions. They've gotten better, but it's like, I'm definitely a different person in this environment because I don't have the tools to just interact fluently. Again, hopefully by the time she's old enough to care, my French will be considerably better.
I mean, it's the same thing here, like first generation immigrant children, having to communicate for their parents and having that struggle. And now you're really experiencing that firsthand. And I wanted to know what that experience was like, because I couldn't imagine that would be easy in any regard. In our original interview, back in 2015, you said something that resonated so much to me. And it's, you cannot be an island. You must create community in the country if you want to have a comfortable life. And I wondered how long it's taken you to feel really rooted there. And like you have community, you have those enduring friendships.
So that's a really hard question. I would say that we had incredible good fortune in that when we bought this house, the man we bought it from had some friends, this couple who came and offered day one. They said, if you need any help with anything, just call us. And they're a German couple and they have become just our best friends. We like, I don't know how we got so lucky. They're incredible people and they are sort of like, they're our rock. I didn't expect to make friends so quickly. I mean, they're like 20 years older than us. They're in a different, her children are grown up and like closer to my age.
But age doesn't matter, right?
I mean, yes and no. Like, I love having older friends. It's so nice. And I love having younger friends. I love having friends. I'll take what I can get at this point. So, and then we had a pandemic, right? Like less than a year after we moved here, this pandemic began. And so it has been a struggle. Like whenever we meet people that we get along, that we're like, oh, those are our people, we like really have made an effort. We've got a couple of French families that we spent Christmas Eve and Christmas with a French family that we adore. Our daughters are friends. Like, it's amazing. But it's taken a while. I wouldn't say that I still don't feel deeply rooted. I'm still working on it. It's been hard the last couple of years. Our lockdowns were very draconian. It has been a different world here than in a lot of other places. We've had very limited like freedom of movement for the first year. It was rough. So slowly, we're getting rooted slowly. Our friendships are extremely precious. I will never take a friendship for granted here. But we're also picky. Like, we don't want to just latch on to people because they speak English. We've made some really sweet friends, and we look forward to COVID being behind us so that we can cultivate some of those friendships more deeply, because a lot of our friends are over 60. And so our child is like almost 4, which is, she's the loose COVID cannon in this situation. So out of an abundance of caution, we're like, let's not expose our elderly friends to this little COVID bomb.
I can relate to this because my daughter just turned 5 and she got her first vaccine yesterday, which just like kind of made me want to cry. It was like, it's just been so long. And I think with any parent that can't protect their kids with the vaccine, and also just like the limiting factor of like feeling like you can't bring your child anywhere to put other people at risk. I wondered what that has been like for you and how you've weathered that time and what that time has looked like in France, because it varies so much across the United States how COVID looks. You know, I visited the South and it looked totally different there than it does up in New England. What has that time looked like for you?
It's been wild. Like, we still have a mask mandate. Like, I haven't seen people's faces in public in almost 2 years now. So that's weird. During the harshest time, like, our lockdowns were pretty crazy. We had to have like an attestation, like a piece of paper that we'd have to print out. And we'd have to write down the time that we left the house, why we were leaving the house. There are only 3 reasons you could leave the house: to like go to work, to take your child to school, or to get groceries. That was it. Or I guess like to go to the doctor. But they really were like, why are you leaving your house? You weren't supposed to be out of your house for like more than 30 minutes. It was, I'm not even kidding. It was really rough. Like, it was restrictive, and like, you could get stopped by a cop who'd be like, let me see your papers. It was just really serious.
What about like hiking or walking, or could you do any of that or no?
Yeah, you could go up to 2 kilometers from your home. That's not very far. That's like shorter than I started running before. I think I got COVID early on. Before I got sick, I was running further than 2 kilometers from the house. So it was mind boggling. Of course, we're so rural. Nobody was going to the police weren't going to stop me on a run. That wasn't going to happen. I think maybe in the cities, things were even harder, but in the country, obviously we had some leeway. We took lots of walks, lots of hikes. We tried to be outside just as much as possible, but it was really hard. We really we definitely, because we live rural and we're sort of isolated to begin with, and I work at home, it was like, in some ways we were like, well, our lives haven't really changed. But then, you go into the village or the city and it was extremely depressing. Like, everything was closed except for pharmacies and grocery stores. We couldn't even really do a lot of work on our house because the bricolage, like all of the hardware stores were closed. Like, it was serious. So it was hard for me to hear people back home complaining about their lockdown. People would be like, just complain. And I'd be like, wow, oh no, the grocery store is like not 24/7. That must be so painful for you. I'm sorry. It was difficult for me to hear people complaining back home in what looked like a very open and loose environment. Not that I think that was better. Here's a funny thing about the French. The French are they love to make rules. They're very structured and sort of rigid society in some ways, but they also love to break rules. You'll just see it's like this naughty thing. They're just really rule breakers. And so it was a big surprise to see people 100% falling into line behind mask mandates. And yeah, you have your I'm sure there are plenty of people that protest. I know there are in lots of different places, but I felt very comforted knowing that there was sort of a greater good mentality. People were very much concerned about caring for their neighbors. And it made me feel really grateful to be somewhere where people were caring for each other, where the sort of greater good was more important than the individual inconvenience.
Yeah. I mean, you said it right there, that feeling of societal responsibility and collective humanity and all of those things that you really wanted COVID to show. And it did in little pieces here and there, but not as much as I hoped. I just want more of that. I want this to be a wake up call for so many people who we needed a really good shaking and a real good glance behind the curtain of all of the stuff that you try to avoid. I'd love for you to talk about any advice that you would give to people who are maybe about to make the transition to another place or already are in a new place, but are feeling like there's a wall, that they are not connected to that community. Any advice you would give them on ways to put themselves out there and to build bridges and not walls around yourself? Because you've, moved into 2 different types of countrysides and found community in both places.
Yeah, I would say first, timing is sort of everything. There's a time in your life, in your 20s, where there's just so much momentum to begin with. And it's so much easier to build a community because it's a community building moment. And it's just a phase of life where people are aggregating and you have time and energy, right? It's just like, it's a wonderful. So like, first of all, if you have the inclination in your 20s, it's a really good time to go for it. Like, don't hold back, because doing this later in life is much harder. Like in your 40s, this is not traditionally like, this is not the time when people are like building up a base. So it's harder, but you also have some advantages. Like you're more grounded, you're more disciplined, you have a little bit more discernment. But it doesn't matter where you are in your life. Like it takes time to find your people. You know, it's like when you're older or you have a small child, I think your criteria changes a little bit. Your time is like more limited, and you're like, not to be morbid, but like you're closer to the end of your life. So like you don't have that luxury of just freedom. Like you want to spend your precious time wisely. So you want to invest in your friendships wisely. You're not like just going out partying, or, you know, it's like your time is an investment in a way that in your 20s, it still is, but not as much. Like you've got more time to burn. You know, I think finding people that are older and have been where you are is extremely helpful, because they can help. Not only are they very inclined to like be of assistance to you because they recognize what you're going through, but you can also look to them for inspiration and go, oh, look, they made it through, and look at like where they are in their life, how wonderful that could be us. It's also really cool to have younger friends who maybe want to be where you are one day. You know, it's like, it's really nice having people who are not just like you and at the same stage of life.
I could not agree more.
Right?
Yeah. And to have the younger friends too. I think that is crucial because, well, and I love your advice for 20 somethings, because just like you and I said, we had our game plan of like how many steps it would take us to reach this end goal dream of like being immersed in nature, living near a farm or on a farm. And like, I actually could have done that in my early 20s if I wanted to. And, you know, I could have created my own business in a small town. I could have done that. But there's just so much fear that's associated with that, because it's not the path that people tell you to take. It's the typical path that people would tell you to take. And so those are such good pieces of advice, especially now as, you know, younger people are coming out of this pandemic too. A lot of them have been living in like densely populated cities, chasing that dream, getting that job out of college, the trajectory of what you're supposed to do. And I think a lot of people in their 20s right now are starting to think, is this what I want to do? Our time on this earth is precious. And we've all had a collective near-death experience to a certain degree, and that has really shifted people's values and, you know, what they want to spend their time doing. You became a parent recently, and my daughter is 1 year older than your daughter, so it's so exciting to see you welcome Charlie into the world. And I wondered what that transition and experience has been like for you. Just, you know, I am also an older mother. Like, I wasn't sure if I was going to have kids. It was kind of a miracle that she arrived at all, quite honestly. And it was such a wild transition, but I would imagine doing that, having that transition also in another country where you didn't speak the language was probably very challenging. And I just wanted to hear what your experience has been like.
I also feel like Charlie, my daughter, was sort of a miracle. Neither of us ever wanted to have children really, but then as soon as the possibility was like in our faces, we were like, yeah, we should do it. Let's just go for it. I arrived in France 7 weeks before she was born. So I didn't have a lot of time to get settled before I became a mother. And honestly, that was fine. Like when we were discussing the craziness of moving to another country and having a kid, basically our idea was, we're moving from lives where we have routines and, you know, stability into a completely new world where we have no routines and like no foundation and no grounding. And then we're become parents. So like, what better time to sort of have everything be new? You know, like it's not going to interrupt our day-to-day lives, because our day-to-day lives are going to be something that we don't even know yet. So
wow, that's so interesting. I never really thought about that. But it's almost like if you have kids younger too, it's the same way. Like things are always in flux. Like one of the hardest things about being an older parent is that like I had all my stuff that I did all the time. And then all of a sudden it was like a bomb went off and I had to like reshuffle everything around. So if it already feels topsy-turvy.
right. I mean, we were like, yeah, it's going to be chaos. So like, whatever, how could we create a better situation? I mean, this was us being kind of weirdo optimists. We were just like, screw it. Let's just be the most chaotic early parents we can be. It was really challenging in so many ways because we didn't have any family close by. But Chris and I are both sort of loners in our own right. And so I think you put two loners together and make them parents, and we're just kind of ready for just the daily grind of, early childhood. Early infancy is bizarre. Like you're just, a human feed bag and you're not sleeping tremendously well. And I read one book that was really good, like Happiest Baby on the Block, that helped me learn how to swaddle and soothe.
Yeah, the 5 S's. I remember, yeah.
Right? That
was very helpful.
That was literally, I read exactly one book about parenting and I was like, I'm good to go. That's cool. I don't know. It was challenging, but also sort of wonderful. I say you can't be an island, but honestly, for the first 3 months, we kind of were an island and it was sort of wonderful. Like I wasn't working. Neither of us were working. We were just going to the market, getting fresh vegetables, cooking, hanging out. It was nice. It was a sort of peaceful time of just regrouping and figuring it out. Now, getting into the healthcare system, getting legal to live here, all of that stuff was simultaneously happening. We made 2 trips when she was 5 weeks old, 8-hour road trips to go and do paperwork at the embassy. There was a lot of extraneous bullshit that was extremely stressful. So I don't want it to, let me not paint this we were just in this this sweet French bubble of, no, it sucked. It was really hard. But it was, there were really lovely moments interspersed with very stressful sort of just the busy work of getting an American citizen born abroad paperwork, getting a passport for an infant. Yeah, it was awesome and terrible.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of the listeners who have made contributions towards the production of this podcast. Every season, I spend about 100 hours preparing, writing, editing, interviewing, sketching, distributing, and I have hard costs for my editor and hosting fees. It means so much to me that you find enough value and meaning in this work to pledge your support to keep it going. If you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy. Just click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or join the Urban Exodus Patreon community. Thank you again. I feel so lucky to be a part of the amazing global community that this project has manifested. Like you said, she was a miracle. You weren't expecting this to happen in your life. You had kind of written that off. And I know that you and your partner both had some difficulties when you were younger. And those experiences really informed your decision to break generational patterns and raise your daughter in a different way. And whatever you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love for you to talk about the contrast of your upbringing versus your daughter's, and any advice for new parents who wish to break those generational patterns. Because I think a lot of us are, dealing with baggage from our childhood of things that you wish you could just stop. And then you see yourself doing it as a parent and have to backpedal.
I just want to preface all of this by saying, start with therapy. If you have if you've got some trauma that's unresolved, dude, start with therapy. Do that. Do that before you bring a person into the world. If you can, if you have it, just do it. And if you don't, do some real introspection, buy some books, just dig deep. I think the first and foremost thing is self-awareness. And for me, I was lucky I had a lot of therapy. And I had a lot of therapy because I was conceived in a Mexican prison, and my dad went to prison in the States when I was a little kid and spent a big chunk of my childhood there. And so my childhood was really scarred by that. And my parents are very nice people, but they were working out a lot of stuff themselves, and they're very sort of self-involved people. And so I think I grew up not feeling very seen or validated. I feel like I kind of raised myself, and I moved out when I was 15. So I don't feel like I was parented properly. And I think that was very difficult for me, just to feel safe and like cared for in the world. I didn't have that foundation, and it's made me super tough and all of that, but it also like made me really kind of fucked up. Like it took a long time. And my husband, on the other hand, his parents divorced when he was Charlie's age, like right around 4. And then his dad moved to the States. He's a professor, and he was raised by his mom, who was like very overbearing, very sort of controlling, and very like conformist. And that was really hard for him. So we both spent countless hours, days, weeks when I was pregnant, really talking about how we wanted to make sure that our child had a really different experience than we did. I mean, wouldn't be hard, like for me, like obviously but like for us, it was really important to have a child in an environment that was like super loving. It's important for her. Like we also just really like and like love each other. We have a fantastic relationship. And we think it's great for our child to see like what a healthy, communicative, mutually supportive, respectful relationship looks like. For me, it's really important to create an environment where my child feels safe. And I pay attention to her. I give her my undivided attention. And I really work on not being so self-involved that I don't see where she is in her life. And I hope that can be a lifelong thing. Like I think that being a parent just means like letting a person be who they are, not like throwing expectations on them. This isn't like little me or little Chris. This is Charlie. Giving her the room to explore who she is and the freedom to experiment, but the safety to know that even if she messes up, no matter what happens, that she has people that love her as she is and accept her and see her, and that she can, she's allowed to make mistakes. We're never going to abandon her. Like she has a foundation, and that's never going to change.
That's such good parenting advice. It's so hard sometimes in the moment to like align with all of those things, but like that's what you strive to do as a parent, right? It's like your child is born who they are. You just like fine tune the radio and like try to make them as good of a person as possible and as kind as possible. And that's all you can really do, and make sure that they feel safe. So, so great. I would love for you, because I know that, you said that your partner, he was like kind of the one that got away and then you reconnected. I know you told me the story about him actually when we were in your yurt like many years ago.
God.
I remember because you said, I used to like live in London and I was dating this boy and we like squatted in buildings, and it just stuck with me because it sounded so romantic. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about how you guys like first met. And then, I know that you reconnected, but how did you know like upon reconnection that like this was the right person?
Oh man. So we met, golly, okay, this is crazy. We met 30 years ago. We met when I was like 13 years old. His dad was a professor at the University of Texas. And he was living in Texas in Austin for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, when he was 19 to like 21, 22. And we were just friends. Like I was a delinquent kid. I hung out smoking cigarettes on the drag near the university, and he's an artist. So he'd be at the cafes, coffee shops drawing. And we were just in the same circle of friends. So we were friends. We were acquainted way back when. And then he went back to London. He moved back to London. And then when I was 19, he visited the States, and I had already bought tickets. I was going to be going to Europe for the first time the following summer. So I'd been thinking about him. I was like, I wonder if I can find Chris Singer, because it would be really nice to crash on his couch when I was in, when I'm in London. And he called me out of the blue and was like, oh, I'm in Austin. I said, oh, we should go get a coffee. And we went and had coffee and fell in love. And that was that. So when I lived in London briefly, it was super romantic. It was a super exciting time. It was also really hard because we were young and broke and, just it's hard when you're young and you fall in love. For me, it was because we fell so in love. And I just thought, if this doesn't work out, I'll just fall in love with somebody else and it'll be great. It's like, we had such a deep kind of like cellular connection. And I just, when you're like 20 years old,
the timing's not right a lot of times.
But you also, don't you just think like that first blush of like crazy love, you're like, oh wow, this is what love is like. How cool. And then so we break up. And then I didn't fall in love again like that until I met Michelle, my ex. We had this great, passionate, turbulent relationship. And when we broke up, it was just gutting because I thought this was the person I was going to be with. But Chris and I had stayed in touch forever. We just he'd call me on my birthday. I'd call him on his birthday. We would we just stayed in touch for many years. And when we reconnected romantically, it was interesting because I feel like I'd pushed it out of my mind for a long time that this was the person that I felt most comfortable with in the world, or that this is the person who I felt most seen by, And so when we reconnected, it was kind of like when you've been underwater for a long time and you finally, you're like going you dive off a cliff, you're deep in the water and suddenly you're swimming and you get up and you're like, just taking a deep breath of air. It just felt like this, oh my gosh, there it is. This is thing that I need. It's vital. This is the relationship. I need this. I need oxygen. I feel this in my bones. This is the person that I am happiest with.
Oh, I just got goosebumps when you said that. I think that, timing is such a big thing when you meet people, and there are people that might have been the right person for you, but you just met them at the wrong time in the wrong space in your life. And especially when you're young, you don't really know who you are or what you need. You're just trying everything on. And so if there's that person that's breaking the surface, that's such a beautiful metaphor of taking that gasp of air. That's the person. That's what you're looking for. I'm so glad that you found that. That's amazing. It's such a gift. I think, we talked a little bit about the harder realities of living there, but I wondered your tenacity to really figure things out. I mean, you built you built a farm from scratch on a raw piece of land out in the rural Texas countryside, and then you just make this big move. How do you overcome those feelings of fear when it comes to taking risks and trying new things? Because I think that we live really in a fear-based society that keeps people from what they want to do or where they want to go. And how do you just punch through the fear?
I have a really simple technique. It's how I've lived my entire life, which is that I do not see people on a hierarchical sort of level. I think I look at people and I'm everybody gets up in the morning, everybody has a poop, everybody has to live in a body. We're basically all the same animal. Obviously we have different circumstances, but people are pretty much all the same. We're made of the same stuff and we have the same sort of capacities and drives and limitations. And so I think if somebody else has done this, I can definitely do this. I was terrified of having a baby, but then I thought, well, literally billions of people do this every single year. So what makes me so special that I can't do it? Literally nothing. So I think almost nothing has not been done. So what makes me so special that, there are circumstances I can't overcome. My life hasn't been that hard. I'm able-bodied. I'm capable. If someone else can do it, surely I can also. That's it. I think that we people do have varying like capacities, but for the specific vessel that I am living in, I have a lot of potential. I'm not afraid. And whatever, failure is great. Failing is really good for you. Failure like helps keep you humble, and it gives you the tools to like, if you've ever done a project and you totally screwed it up, you know damn well that the second time you do it is so much easier.
Yeah, it's true. You will check all of the boxes to make sure that that never happens again.
I'm not afraid of failing. Failure is totally okay.
Before you moved, you were piecing together your income, working as a massage therapist, making body products, hosting workshops, and selling produce. How has your career kind of path or how you make money changed since you've moved to France?
It's completely radically changed. I work 100% as a freelance writer. I mostly copyright. And I found my niche, I guess, in the last couple years. I work for nonprofit organizations. I'm really good at like messaging strategy, and I like people. So having lots of meetings is a pleasure for me. It's a very different lifestyle. It's sedentary. I sit in front of a computer a lot, which is, I mean, a full 360 that's full 180. 360, I'd be back in the same place. It's been a big change, but it's also been pretty amazing. Like I work a lot less than I used to. I have a lot more time for knitting and baking and being in the garden. It's strangely like my body is not in quite as good of shape as it was, but my life is much more enjoyable. Like I actually have leisure. I have work-life balance. And yeah, it's been wonderful.
I actually know somebody that has a similar job, freelance writer for nonprofits. And I remember looking at his name's Jake. I don't know. He lives in Seattle. Maybe you know him. I looked at his career and I was just like, wow, it's such a cool job because there was so much flexibility. And I wondered like what the steps were that took you into that career, because I think that, you know, people when they're thinking about making a move outside of the city, the scariest part is income and trying to find a way to make a living. And there are all of these kind of steps that you can take to kind of build your own kind of side business, side hustle, or like work from scratch on something until you get to a point where you feel secure in it. And obviously, you know, you didn't really have that time per se, but I wondered what the steps were and how you found your way into freelance writing.
All right. So when I moved to France, I sold the farm, which gave me a financial cushion that I had never had before because my property appreciated pretty insanely, being close to Austin and all the improvements that I made, moving a house onto it. I had a luxury that a lot of people don't have, and I will admit that up front. Like I had some money, so I didn't have to, like, I knew, I was like, I'm going to have a baby. And I was like, I'm not going to work for, you know, at least like 8 months. I just kind of set a time frame. And I moved here saying, I'm going to try my hand at writing professionally because I've always written, people have always been like, oh, you're such a good writer. And I mean, whatever, like, I always wondered, are people just kind of blowing sunshine up my ass, or am I actually good at this? Like, let me find out. Americans especially have a funny thing about, like, you can't make any money being creative. I'm sure, you know, you've heard this whole like, oh, artist, you're going to, there's like this sort of mythology about like if you are an artist, you're going to starve and suffer. And it's like, that is baked into our psyches. So I never imagined I could make a living writing because my whole life, all I've heard is that you can't. It's crazy. You shouldn't even try. The people that tell you that are not people who have actually tried, incidentally. So yeah, I started from scratch. I had no idea what to do. I like took an online course and just like tried to absorb everything I could. And then I just like, you know, I got on Upwork and made a profile, and oh my gosh, I applied for probably 40 jobs before I got my first one. And it was something terrible. I mean, it was just like some crappy, low-paying job, but it was the first one, and I got a good review. You know, like I just built it up from the get-go. I just treated each job like it was the best job I ever had, and just like, you know, it's like there's no such thing as a crappy job when you don't have any work. Like you just take pride in every job. And so I've done every kind of copywriting, I think, at this point. I've worked for so many different like corporate clients, tech clients. I've done so much different writing. And I just had this nonprofit client that kind of fell in love with their organization. And I definitely fell in love with the work. And then they started referring me to other nonprofits. This is really, I mean, it was such a love fest that I was already thinking, this is a really nice direction. You're not going to get rich writing for nonprofits, but I also don't want to be rich.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
just want to live.
Yeah. I've asked myself, in freelance writing, people, it's all about 6 figures and hustle. And I'm like, how much money do you need? I don't want to work 60 hours a week and make 6 figures. That's not interesting at all to me. So yeah, it just, I think you have to experiment and like work for a lot of different, if you want to write commercially, you just write for a lot of commercial clients and find out what you're good at and what you like. And that intersection is what you should lean into.
That's awesome. That's such good advice. And I love that you started kind of at Upwork and just like kind of built, because it's all a relationship game. Once you start to get those clients and then you're able to build a relationship with those clients, then it like builds all like this network that you have outside of where you are living, which is so crucial, especially in small rural areas where there is not really a centralized local economy that can support all of the people that live there.
And if I can just add, I can't believe it took me this long to get into writing. Like, if I knew then what I know now, I would have started writing a lot sooner. And I probably would have had a much easier time farming because I could have supplemented my work on the farm with writing and I would have done just fine.
Yeah. And I think that, like you said, that narrative of people can't make money in the creative arts is so false. I mean, when I moved here, I started building websites just because there was nobody else building websites. So I just went and I like learned how to use the web building templates.
Wow.
and I had, I had worked as a producer at a graphic design firm. So I had like by osmosis picked up some design things and knew a little bit about branding, but it was really just having that, like you said, if you don't have a job, the job that you get is your best job at that point. So it's just like, okay, well, I'll just kind of fake it until this is something that I do. And I think that advice is so helpful for people because it's really scary and there's a lot of imposter syndrome and maybe you have some skills, but they aren't like fully developed. It's okay to like develop those skills while you're doing the work.
You must develop those skills while doing the work. I see a lot of people that are like, well, I'm going to take this class and this workshop and this class. And I'm like, why don't you just try working? Like, you're going to learn a lot faster when you have like a deadline and you're not sure how to do it and you just figure it out. It might not be the best, but you're going to figure it out because you have to.
From a financial perspective, have you found it more or less expensive to live in France versus the United States?
It really depends on where you are. If I was in Paris, it would be like ridiculously expensive, I guess. It's much less expensive in many different ways. Like, yes, you pay a lot of, as an independent person, like a self-employed person in America, you pay out the nose in taxes to begin with. So I think maybe people who are gainfully employed and have a normal job would be shocked at the taxes that you pay here. But as a self-employed person, I'm like, oh, it's basically the same, except here, like our childcare was free. Our kid was in daycare and we got a check every month. They covered all of our childcare expenses because we fell under a certain income threshold. Healthcare, it's so cheap that even if you pay for it, it feels free compared to America. But if you're in the system, you get reimbursed for like 80% of your expenses. And it's very cheap to begin with. So like doctors like apologize. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I have to give you this bill. And you're like, that's cool. Like you don't know what it's like in my country, do you? So yeah, I think the benefits that you receive because there's a safety net and there's like a, a standard of like collective care, I guess, that is being federally mandated as it is here, it offsets any increased expenses. I find it to be not too expensive living here, but I live a very sort of simple life. We certainly don't eat out very often. I find it much less expensive here though, overall.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge. Just having a safety net, just like you said. And we certainly don't have that here in the States. And, I think that actually like a lot of that lacking of a safety net has created a lot of the division in the United States as well. And I wondered, as an outside observer, if you had any thoughts on this current state of affairs and any hopes or words of encouragement that you have for your country of origin on ways to maybe turn things around.
I mean, yeah, it's hard because America is in a strange and somewhat dark place right now. And I see a lot of people that I consider on my side, like sort of lefty, liberal kind of people, adopting like a really destructive sort of nihilism about politics. It's like, oh, voting doesn't matter. And I see some really destructive behavior. And I really feel like there's a lot of hope. And the hope that I see is in regular, like women, people of color, like people that are like, I'm going to embody the hope that I feel, and I'm going to run for office. I'm going to run for city council. I'm going to be, I think that there's a lot of hope, but it's going to take a lot of grassroots efforts. I think people need to step up to the plate and stop expecting some politician savior to come in. We need to see more everyday working class people, diverse people, people that don't come from deep generational wealth. We need to see more of those people stepping into leadership roles. That is what will turn the tide of American politics. I see collective bargaining like, dude, if they raise the price of gas, if they raise taxes on fuel, people are in the streets protesting. They will shut down the freeway in France. And it works every time. Like teachers are having problems, they protest. Like this is a protest heavy society. Also, you're not going to get fired here because it's hard for that to happen. So it's different. I get it. But people really can take a more active role in government, in voting. I think it's important to be hopeful. I think it's important to put differences aside and like seize collective action. And I think that is like the way forward is through collective action.
In our initial interview, again, back in 2015, because you said so many beautiful things in that interview, you said, I was astonished by how therapeutic it was to drag a blanket out into the field, lay beneath the stars, and feel the minuscule weight of my existence. It was incredibly liberating. I saw so many meteors that first summer. I sometimes say that the sky healed me. And there's so much wisdom in that statement. And I wondered how your connection to the natural world has grown or changed or evolved since that first kind of move into the countryside of Texas.
Oh, wow. It's interesting. My connection to nature is really deepened in a lot of ways here because I'm much more rural than before. And I feel here like I'm more connected to a tradition of stewardship. Like you look out over these agricultural fields and there's so much, what is the word I'm looking for? There's such a like matrix of forest that is left. There's there's so many green corridors, and you can just kind of look out over the land and you can see that even in this intensively farmed area, there's a real understanding of how nature works. And there's a real sort of yielding to that. Even the most intensive farmers yield to nature and work with it. And I own this property. I feel like I'm stewarding this property for as long as I happen to be here. And I love being in a place where there is such intense history of people, farmers, yielding to the land and working with it in partnership. It's been interesting. And of course, having a child is really fun because you get to expose them to the natural world, which is so nourishing and mesmerizing. You get to see what a small person is drawn to and sees. And it's, you do see the world through slightly different eyes, and it's a different way of experiencing nature.
Well, and to be able to start that connection at such a young age, because, I think that in some ways, due to like our need for convenience, we separate ourselves so much from nature. Like we are inside in air conditioned boxes or heated boxes, and there isn't that like real drive to get outside all the time in our society. And so to like kind of flip the switch and have it be that is her first experiences, is that connection. That's such a gift.
She's very lucky. I'm a little jealous. I'm like, God, what a nice childhood this is.
I wondered if you'd noticed the effects of climate change in your region of France, having lived there for only 4 years, and what hopes or fears your community has when it comes to mitigating those effects of the current climate crisis.
Oh, man. From the moment we landed, people have been saying like, oh, this is a really unusual, every single season they've been like, this is a really unusual spring. Oh, this is an unprecedented winter. Like every single season, people have said these things. So I think there's a ubiquitous understanding that the climate is changing. Last year, we had a freak late freeze here in our region. I mean, the wine country was devastated. Vineyards were like, oh, well, this year's a total wash, which in France is a pretty big deal. We have an orchard on our property, and 85%, gosh, maybe more, most of our trees were just starting to set fruit. They had like tiny little baby. We got nothing. Like we had a couple of trees, we had cherries and apples, but we lost most of our fruit. And it was really shocking because every year here, I'm like, oh, I'm going to spend like a whole month like canning and juicing. And that didn't happen last year. We just didn't have any fruit, and neither did any of our neighbors. And the farmers have had a really hard time adjusting. And we know one young organic farmer, and he speaks enough English that we have really good back and forths. And he's explained that, he's constantly experimenting, using different crops, different rotations, changing the timings. This is the way it's going to be, I think, for like resilience. Is there's no monocropping where we are. And I think it gives them a little bit of buffering capacity. If they have a totally like terrible sunflower crop, their barley crop will probably be okay. There are farmer collectives here that everybody pays dues into. And I think that they have a lot of they have a safety net as well. So if they have a total loss, they tend to have like some recompense. That said, farmers have had a really rough time here. There have been like suicides. And I mean, it's been really hard. So I think the hopeful thing moving forward is really being flexible, finding different crops, different rotations, variety. I don't want to be grim, but I very strongly believe that, food production may be one of the big problems that we see in the next couple of decades.
Well, just think about, supply chain of an entire region's fruit is all destroyed from one accidental day of frost. And the weather patterns are shifting so that it's not that it's like maybe necessarily like super, super hot. It's just like there are these freak occurrences that happen that nobody expects and nobody can prepare for without like major infrastructure changes.
By the same token, I will say, like, my in-laws are climate scientists. This is of some renown, but so my husband and I have been like steeped in like climate science for a long, long time. And I think I studied it. Like, I feel like we have a bit more sort of foundational understanding than a lot of lay people might. All of that said, I've always been very gloomy about the future. I'm like, the future is looking pretty terrible. Here, where we are, this is a very food producing region of France. I find it very hard to believe that no matter how extreme the weather changes in our lifetime may happen to be, I don't think that this will stop being a food producing region. Like, these lands have been farmed for literally like a dozen centuries. This is a moment in time where we will have adversity. We're very adaptable as a species. I do not feel so gloomy that I think, oh, this is it. This is the last generation of farmers. Like, I think that there's plenty to be hopeful for, but we have to be flexible. We can't just keep doing things the way we've done them.
Thank you. That makes me feel a little bit better, especially because you have climate scientists in your family. That makes me feel a lot better, because I do think that there's a certain level of like terror and apathy that is developing, and that is not useful or constructive, and it's not like going to get us where we need to go.
No.
I wanted to end our conversation by reading a passage again from our initial interview from back in 2015, and ask you to leave us with any additional words of encouragement or advice on ways to let go of fear, get out of your own way, and work towards manifesting your dreams. So here's your quote. Be open-minded, know that you are way tougher than you think you are, let yourself be uncomfortable, and see how it helps you grow.
I still agree with that, like 100-fold. But I would also say, the comfort zone is useful, and it's a good place to go. Like, we all have a comfort zone, and it's a place to go to heal. It's a place to rest and regroup. But it's also a place to visit and not stay, because the happiest people that I know are the people that continually challenge themselves. And the challenge happens on the fringe, just outside of your comfort zone. When you're uncomfortable, that's where you're learning, that's where you're growing, that's where you're experimenting, that's where you're failing. This is like, it's a good place to be. So yeah, I think it's a good place to, comfort is good. You need it, but don't stay there long. I was listening to an interview with Mary Oliver recently, and she's got this poem, When Death Comes, and the last line has just been with me for like days. And it's, I don't want to end up simply having visited this world, right? Just know that this thing doesn't last forever. So put yourself in it, be uncomfortable, find your way, but you're not going to find your way staying in the place that you know.
Thank you again, Francesca, for joining us on the show. Some of my key takeaways from this episode: don't get so attached to rigid plans in life. Life is constantly changing. And by allowing the unexpected in, you might surprise yourself with where your journey takes you. Immerse yourself fully in each new chapter of your life. Also, spending time in a different culture can really allow you to question and push back against ingrained beliefs you might have taken at face value. See how other people live their lives, and be willing to look at your own values objectively. Coming from a difficult childhood does not mean you need to resign to this idea of predetermined destiny. There is room to heal, to shift your reality, and to make a better life for yourself and those around you. And lastly, paraphrasing Francesca's closing sentiment, do things that scare you. Challenge yourself. Let your life be hard sometimes, so that you may have a chance to surprise yourself with your own strength and ingenuity. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. This project is made possible by listener support. I do this work because the people I meet through this project give me hope for the future, and I think we could all use a little more motivation and inspiration in this current moment in history. All of the work that I do through this project is to encourage people to believe in themselves and to work towards a better future for their community and for our planet. Your continued support will keep this passion project running. The easiest way to contribute is to click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or you can buy an ad spot in an upcoming episode, shop our online store of rurally made goods, or join our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews with podcast guests, videos, live presentations, and so much more. Visit patreon.com/urbanexodus. Another way to support is by giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and recommending Urban Exodus to your friends. Thank you again for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do this without all of you. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.